Hello people. So today I've decided to do something which is going to be something of, let's say, reflection. I'm actually an English teacher. If I haven't mentioned that in previous videos, I'm a TEFL teacher, part-time. It's pretty hard to get work these days actually, because I work on a freelance basis. But I'm a TEFL teacher, teaching the English language, various grammatical aspects of the English language to international students. Over the past year I've been teaching Chinese students on a one-to-one basis, tutorials. But that video is not so much about teaching. In fact, what I want to say is I'm actually in the process of applying for a job in China, mainland China, which if all goes to plan I'll be there in about February next year. I'm making this video in October 2012. And the plan is to be in China by roughly February or March 2013, possibly for a 5 or 6 month contract, but I'm still in the early stages of the application process, so I don't know what could happen. I may not get there, I may get there, we'll see what happens. I've got the qualifications they're asking for, so hopefully that'll be okay. Anyway, the reason I want to teach in China is, needless to say, it's a country that I've been fascinated by for a long time. The reason I say needless to say is you may have seen other videos of mine concerning China. But I'd like to talk a little bit about my perceptions of China at this stage, because I do think that sometimes travelling to a country can change perception, alter your preconceived idea of a place. So I want to make this video about my perceptions at this stage. Just so you know, I've never been to China. I've been around Europe, I've been to North America, but I've never been to China, or the Far East for that matter. So that's the context of this video. So everything I know about China is based on sort of research, finding out myself from a range of sources, media to some extent. Just a range of sources, but also not just media, because that's misleading. That implies that I just believe Hollywood or something. That's not like that. I'm talking about all sorts of media. So anyway, I'd like to just talk a bit about my perceptions of China in this video, and it may well be that when I come back from China, hopefully I'll get out there, but when I come back there'll be an opportunity to make another video. I don't know how easy it'll be to make a video out there, so on the possibility that I won't be able to, I'm going to make one before, one after. This is the before video. It may well be, of course, that my views on certain things are unchanged, and honestly I do anticipate that. I do anticipate there's some things that I have such a conviction on that going to the country isn't going to change my mind on those things. Anyway, I'll get cracking here and speak about my reflections on China. Just so you know, I'm going to divide this into two segments. The first segment is going to be negative, so it's more cynical overviews about China. The second part is going to be positive. I'll try and balance them out. I'll get the negative out of the way first, because you know, I've made videos similar to this before and have been misunderstood, so I'll get this out of the way first. Okay, negative. Well, I have a very, very big concern at China's human rights issues, based on a whole range of freelance independent reports from Amnesty International and other human rights organisations. China's human rights record is absolutely abysmal, in my opinion. I'll start with one of the most prominent issues of recent years. That's the ruthless persecution of Falun Gong practitioners. Now, when Jiang Zemin introduced this crackdown, the principal reason was because it was believed that there were more Falun Gong members than there were members of the Communist Party. And Jiang Zemin personally saw that as a threat. Ironically, there were many members of the Communist Party who were also Falun Gong practitioners. So he saw this as a threat, both to his own ego but also to the party, and as a result he introduced this crackdown. He vilified them as a cult, and he stirred up propaganda against them so that Chinese people believe this crackdown was justified on the grounds that, according to their propaganda, Falun Gong was a cult. Now, I have examined Falun Gong material. I've examined their ideology. I'm not a Falun Gong practitioner. I'm not a religious person, but I see absolutely no evidence of some of the claims the regime makes against them. For example, they say that Falun Gong's a cult. Well, I see no evidence that Falun Gong has brainwashed people or anything like that. There's no evidence that one of the common things the communist regime uses is that they're a threat to security. Again, I've seen absolutely no evidence whatsoever to suggest that there's any sort of Falun Gong agenda to present any sort of security threat to China, violent security threat. Basically, the regime just doesn't like their popularity, and given that they're not one of the state-approved religions, i.e. Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, and one or two others, then they felt they need to crack down. Now, let me be clear what I mean by crackdown. This isn't just banning the organisation. This includes brainwashing sessions where they're brainwashed into believing their ways are wrong and believing communist ways are right. Torture. And just in case anyone disputes that, there's plenty of reports verifying this. There's photographs verifying it. If those photos are fake, then there must be a lot of photoshopping going on. But I see no reason to doubt the authenticity of this, because it's very characteristic of what one-party regimes do. And I have to say it's barbaric. And they don't spare women and old people either. There's estimates that somewhere in the region of 3,500 people have been tortured to death. Either they've died from their injuries or they've been tortured to death by the regime for being Falun Gong practitioners. Now, that's the most obvious stain on human rights, but there's many, many others. The Chinese legal system is deeply corrupt, because a lot of cases that are presented as criminal cases will be trumped up charges, often financial and so on, but it's actually a way to silence critics. For example, Bo Xilai, whilst party chairman in Chongqing, had a reputation for taking on organised crime. Now, I'm no fan of snakeheads and so on, so you might think, well, he's a good guy, he's taking on the bad guys, snakehead gangs, etc. That's all very well, except included in that crackdown were a lot of dissidents and people who were silenced for being critics of the party. And, it goes without saying that public demonstrations in China are very, very difficult. Actually, in the last year or so, there has been more of them, and the authorities have somewhat mixed response. But, there's so many issues, not even thinking about China's past. I mean, I'm not even going to get into the days of Mao, some of the things that went on then, because I'd be on this video all day. But some of the human rights infractions that have been going on. Another notable example is the forced abortion case recently, whereby because a woman couldn't pay the fee for having an extra child, she was forced to have an abortion. This is barbaric, in my opinion. That was widely circulated, and a lot of Chinese netizens were absolutely outraged about that. And I'm getting near the halfway point of this video, so I'm going to switch to the positive soon. But the other big issue I have concern about is censorship. Now, for those apologists for the regime, I would say, if it's so innocent, if the communist regime is so innocent, why do they impose censorship? Ask yourself that. If they have nothing to hide, why the censorship? If they're so confident in their position and their moral high ground, why don't they just let it out there, let people have the debate? But they don't want that, because they don't want Chinese citizens to scrutinise them. Now, the Chinese people aren't stupid, and I don't actually believe they're as brainwashed as they may have been in the past. I believe they are a lot more independent-minded today. They will question things more. I think that's great. I think that's very healthy. And I think, coming to think about it, I'm running out of time here. I may divide this video into 2 videos, actually. Also a positive side, because that makes it easier and to some extent. But I think the censorship is appalling, because not only is that preventing people from forming their own views on modern Chinese history, because they're just fed state propaganda, and key events like Tiananmen Square are censored, and whenever they are mentioned, it's always in the context of, oh, it's an American conspiracy. It never happened, or there was much fewer people who died than is believed, and it's completely spun out of proportion. Now, I don't know exactly what happened that day, but I know a lot of innocent people died, and I know that the regime took a hard line on dissent. That goes without saying. Now, the exact circumstances may be more open to debate, but how are we ever going to know the truth as long as censorship persists? If you're a supporter of the regime, if anything, why don't you speak against censorship, if for any other reason, to prove me wrong, and to prove all those people that believe that Tiananmen Square was a brutal and violent crackdown to silence dissent. Now, I mentioned the Tiananmen Square issue to someone recently. I was having a strong debate with this person, and their attitude was, oh, I'm too tired, I don't want to talk about that. Okay. I think a lot of Chinese citizens maybe do feel that something happened that day, but they're not sure what. But as long as censorship persists, we're never going to know. I just think it's absolutely appalling that you have a system whereby only one opinion is filtered through, only one opinion is heard. Now, I often hear Chinese nationalists come to the West and say, oh, we've heard both sides because we've been in the West and we've heard the other side now. But what they're overlooking is the fact that for most of their life they will have heard communist propaganda. And yes, they may hear the other side when they come to the West, but when you are fed one source of information for years and years and years, and you're told that, for example, dissidents are traitors. I've had Chinese people say to me, decent Chinese people, who in every other sense are fairly decent people, say to me, actually I had one girl, she said, how would you feel if British people went to another country and said bad things about your country? Well, I may not be happy with that, but that doesn't mean I'm going to support them being tortured. That doesn't mean I'm going to say, oh, let's censor them. No, if I think they're wrong, I'll say let them have their view. They're full of crap, but let them have their view. And that's the thing that these people don't realise. I mean, apologists for the regime. When you silence someone's opinion and only one side of the argument is heard, that is just not fair, whatever way you look at it. And I think it's partly cowardice on the part of the regime, because I think they don't want people to hear the other side. And that explains the censorship. Now, people are going to say there's censorship in every country. That's true. There is some level of censorship here, but it's not political censorship. We have censorship, for example, when it comes to child safety. There will be, for example, certificates on DVDs, etc., which arguably is a form of censorship. But generally speaking, political views are not censored. In fact, there's no general about it. You can pretty much say whatever you want. I can openly insult the Queen and David Cameron. I can openly challenge them and nothing will happen to me. People might disagree, but I know I'm not going to be taken away in a van with blackened out windows. In China, there's a possibility that would happen, and it frequently does in the case of dissidents. Now, you have brave human rights lawyers like Hu Jia and Chen Guangcheng, whose only crime was to campaign against abuse of power and to represent people who couldn't defend themselves. In the case of Hu Jia, he represented AIDS victims. In the case of Chen Guangcheng, he stood up for young women. So these are brave guys, and women as well. Ni Yulan. There's many examples. And a lot of apologists for the regime say they're American spies, etc. There's absolutely no evidence for that. I'm running to the end of this video now, but those are the two fundamental things I have major discomfort with when it comes to China. Human rights abuses and censorship. And they go hand in hand, because with censorship, there's a reason the regime is covering that up. If you disagree with me, then ask yourself, why the censorship? If you think I'm full of shit, ask yourself, why the censorship? If you can't answer that, okay, I'm going to go on to the next video now.